I was halfway to the podium when the silence of the massive auditorium was ripped apart. At my own graduation ceremony, my sister stood up and shouted, "She cheated her way through college." The entire audience stared. I walked to the podium, accepted my diploma, and whispered to the dean, who smiled and nodded. That moment, the perfect, horrifying collision of my years of work and her festering resentment, is where my story truly begins. The scrape of her chair was the first sound. It wasn't a casual shift, it was a violent, theatrical movement, sharp enough to split the very fabric of the moment. Then came the noise. Ariana was a natural performer, and she'd chosen the biggest stage possible. She rose from the family seating area, the white of her blazer reflecting the stage lights, and pointed a finger at me like a prosecutor delivering a verdict. "She doesn't deserve that diploma," she screamed. "She lied! She manipulated the system. Ask anyone." The sound ripped through the university auditorium like fabric tearing. The air immediately thickened with stunned silence. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Hundreds of parents and students, dressed in their finest, froze like statues. Every single head turned toward the stage. Toward me, the recipient of her clean, public execution. I saw my mother clutching my father's arm, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. My brother was mercifully out of town, but my sister, Ariana, was burning for an audience, and she had it. For a heartbeat, I considered stopping, turning, defending myself. But that was her game. Her plan required me to panic, to deny, to engage in the very chaos she thrived on. I could feel the heat on my face, the weight of 1,000 eyes, all asking the same single, crushing question. Is it true? I kept walking. My legs moved, one after the other, deliberate, measured. It felt as if I were holding together 4 years of academic work, late nights, and quiet effort with nothing but the strength in my spine and my last reserves of breath. The click of my heels on the polished wood floor was the only sound I could hear over the adrenaline roaring in my ears. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Looking back would have meant acknowledging her control. My name, Tessa Hart, was called by the vice dean. It sounded formal, detached, an almost clinical acknowledgement of my existence. The walk was the longest of my life. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, not for the joy of it, but for the war I knew was coming. I'd already won the real battle, but she didn't know it yet. I knew her only objective was to destroy the one thing I had built entirely for myself. The one thing that proved I was more than just the quiet sister standing in her shadow. When I reached the podium, the dean, Dean Matthews, stood there, his expression steady, his hand resting lightly on the stack of diplomas. He knew everything. We had spoken the night before. I knew that one simple motion from him would decide the next phase of this agonizing public mess. The crowd was still breathing shallowly, their phones lifted like bright rectangles capturing the spectacle Ariana wanted so desperately. I accepted the rolled diploma. The parchment felt heavy, cold, solid. I lifted my chin, looked the dean straight in the eye, and leaned in just an inch. "It's under my seat," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the remaining, scattered whispers of the audience. Envelope marked A19. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply smiled a small, knowing smile, and gave a faint nod. That nod was the quiet beginning of the end. It told me the strategy was now in play. Ariana had chosen chaos and volume. I had chosen preparation and silence. And my silence was about to speak far louder than any shout. The fight was over the moment she started it. Now, it was just a matter of execution. I walked off the stage, diploma in hand, ready to watch her carefully constructed collapse. I knew the fight had been moved from her stage to a courtroom, and in that arena, her theatrics were worthless. My 4 years of work, my quiet effort, had finally been protected. I could breathe. The quiet horror of the auditorium lingered, not as noise, but as a chilling, collective memory pressing against my temples. The way Ariana's voice had cracked on that final accusation. The desperate need for attention shining in her eyes. It felt like the climax of a toxic play that had been running for 20 years. To understand why she would risk total collapse, just to sabotage my single, solitary victory, I had to look back. Back to when the sweetness in her smile started to curdle. I didn't grow up expecting my sister to become my enemy. If anything, I spent most of my childhood trying to catch whatever light Ariana walked around with. She was the golden one, the standard. In the home my parents built in the suburbs of Portland, she was louder, brighter, and effortlessly magnetic. She was the one relatives leaned toward at family dinners, drawn in by her colorful stories and easy charm. I was the quiet one, 2 years younger. Often sitting beside her, learning how to make myself small so she could shine bigger. I took pride in her glow, seeing her success as a reflection of my own safe, protected world. I was the little sister, the shadow. That was my place, and it was comfortable. But something shifted in high school, something subtle, almost imperceptible, like a foundation settling. I stopped being the quiet kid who trailed behind her and started becoming someone on my own. My passion wasn't in performance or big social gestures. It was in the methodical pursuit of knowledge, the quiet certainty of psychology textbooks and research. By junior year, my grades edged past hers, not with effortful competition, but simply because the work came easily to me. Teachers called on me more. Then the scholarships started arriving. The first one came in a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name, Tessa Hart, printed boldly across the front. It offered a full ride to the state university. When I showed it to Ariana, she hugged me tightly, but the smile she gave me carried the sweetness of fruit left out too long. Just a little too tight, a little too saccharine. She dismissed it as luck. Or perhaps the university's quota for quiet, hard-working types. It was the first crack I saw, not in my confidence, but in the foundation of our relationship. The distance grew wider when college started. I left for campus with a duffel bag and a stack of expensive psych textbooks, feeling a mix of terrified excitement and profound independence. Ariana, meanwhile, stayed home after abruptly dropping out of her own graduate program at the end of her first year. The reason was vague, a mixture of not feeling challenged and the program being beneath her. I didn't think it mattered then. We had different paths, different timing. But the real trouble began 3 months into my freshman year. The first crack appeared on my scholarship refund statement. A missing amount. It wasn't massive, just over $500. But it was missing. I went to the financial aid office, and the explanation was vague. Something about a clerical error and a pending adjustment. When I called home, asking my parents if they had heard anything from Ariana, they exchanged a look too quick for me to decode. It was a flicker of anxiety, instantly covered. Then came the emails. They started small, easy to shrug off. A plagiarism complaint about a paper I hadn't even written yet. A canceled tutoring session with someone I didn't recognize. A bizarre email to Professor Hale, apologizing for missing an appointment I never made. I blamed the chaos of a large school system, the endless bureaucracy. But they built on each other's subtle weight, like small stones dropped into a bag, slowly pressing down on my reputation. I started to feel people watching me in the hallways with the hesitation of someone approaching a cracked mirror, wondering if the glass was stable. My roommate, Sarah Cooper, noticed the shift before I said a word. Sarah was my childhood friend, loyal and quiet, but possessed of an internal strength I often relied on. "You're checking your phone like you're waiting for something bad," she whispered one night in our studio apartment. I didn't know how to explain that I wasn't waiting for bad news. I was waiting for a pattern. I was waiting for the terrifying possibility that the random attacks were connected. The truth is, I kept hoping it wasn't Ariana. That my sister, the girl who used to braid my hair before school and teach me how to sneak cookies from the pantry, couldn't possibly be behind all of it. But hope, I learned, has a way of blinding you right before the final blow. I just didn't know that blow would land on the one day she knew I couldn't defend myself. I knew the quiet kid was finally going to have to fight. The small, easy, to dismiss incidents had done their job. They had woven themselves into the background noise of my academic life, turning the excitement of college into a constant, low-grade fever. The months leading up to graduation felt like living inside a room where someone kept dimming the lights, not enough to plunge me into darkness, just enough to make me perpetually question what I was seeing and if I was going crazy. Every time I thought the worst was behind me, something new slipped under the door. It started again with money. A second adjustment to my scholarship payments, this time $1,000 missing. The financial aid office was apologetic but vague. Then came a notice about a missing departmental form for my honors thesis. A form I knew I had submitted back in November. Confirmed with a time-stamped receipt. Then the system itself turned against me. My campus login account was abruptly locked out for repeated suspicious activity. I stared at the login screen in my dorm room, my pulse climbing as if the system itself were telling me I didn't fully belong here anymore. The technical rejection felt like a profound personal failure. It was as if every security measure designed to protect me was being used to indict me. The official confrontation arrived via Professor Hale, my behavioral psychology advisor, a man who rarely raised his voice above a thoughtful murmur. He called me into his office one afternoon, and the air between us felt heavy. "A complaint came through Tessa," he said carefully, folding his hands on his desk. "Someone claims you plagiarized parts of your behavioral analysis report." My stomach dropped with a sickening force. That report had taken me weeks. Late nights fueled by cold leftovers, endless corrections, and meticulous sourcing. It was the best work I had ever produced. I opened my mouth to launch into an elaborate defense, but he raised a hand, stopping me. "I don't believe it," he stated simply, his eyes steady and kind. "I've seen your raw notes. But I'm telling you so you can prepare." "Prepare for what?" I asked, the question catching in my dry throat. A war I didn't start. I walked out of his office with that phrase echoing in my head. The whispers followed me out, louder now, more confident. Ivan, a classmate I'd known since freshman year, gave me a strange, assessing look in the hallway. No anger, just evaluation. A girl in my lab group avoided eye contact completely. Even Sarah Cooper, my trusting roommate, was starting to show the strain. "You don't think someone's targeting you, right?" she asked late one night as we studied. "I don't know," I answered, the lie feeling cheap even in the darkness. But I did know. I just didn't want to say her name out loud. Naming it meant acknowledging that the girl who taught me how to ride a bike was actively trying to destroy my life. The turning point came the night I found a message in my inbox. It was an email, apparently sent by me, to a faculty assistant, canceling a meeting I'd been counting on for my capstone review. The tone wasn't mine. The phrasing was awkward and overly formal. The digital signature was close, but not quite right. But the damage, that was very much mine. The capstone review was crucial, and rescheduling it would push me dangerously close to the deadline. I sat on my bed in the half-light of our studio apartment, scrolling through old, fragmented memories of Ariana, like I was watching a damaged film reel. The backhanded comments, the sharp smiles whenever I won. The times she dismissed my genuine effort as simple good luck. The way she'd been drifting aimlessly since leaving her grad program, always comparing her listless present to my ambitious future, always tallying perceived injustices. And somewhere between those toxic memories, the truth formed, quiet, sharp, undeniable. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was choreographing my downfall piece by piece, and it required access, knowledge, and a profound, personal bitterness that only one person possessed. I was no longer fighting shadows. I was fighting my sister. And I had to fight back immediately, before she took the final, permanent step toward ruin. The confirmation that someone was orchestrating my downfall brought a terrifying stillness. I was done hoping that I was wrong. I was done pretending these attacks were random. My next move had to be precise, legal, and undeniable. Before taking action, I drove home that weekend, needing to test the waters, needing to see if my parents already knew the depth of Ariana's bitterness. I found my father in the backyard, standing by the old fence he'd been meaning to fix for years. He was watering the hydrangeas, acting as if the world wasn't closing in on me. The normalcy of the suburban scene was jarring against the panic I felt. I started, keeping my voice low. Has Ariana ever said something about me? About school? He paused, the water trickling onto his shoes. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. She's been tense. Tessa, he admitted, his voice heavy. She said you get everything handed to you. Said your life has been too easy since you went to university. He turned the water off. I told her that wasn't fair. The rest of the conversation didn't matter. The fracture was already there, exposed by his hesitant words. The foundation of their faith in her, built on years of being the golden child, was still standing, but there was a significant crack. I knew I couldn't rely on them to see the truth, until it was hammered home by external, undeniable proof. When I returned to campus, I made my decision. No more family loyalty, only objective truth. I needed a specialist, someone who could see the ghosts in the machine. I reached out to a friend of a friend who gave me the name Noah Vance. A tech investigator downtown. The kind of person who didn't speak much but listened. Really listened. The first time we met, I laid out the whole chaotic timeline in his small, cluttered office. Every odd payment, every fabricated cancellation, every whisper that had clung to me like smoke. Noah, a man in his late 30s with intense, focused eyes, simply tapped the edge of his laptop when I finished. If someone's been in your accounts, they left footprints, he said, his voice flat and factual. People always do. That was the moment the quiet dread inside me finally turned into steely resolve. It wasn't about me proving my innocence anymore. It was about the data proving her guilt. 3 days later, Noah called me back to his shared workspace downtown. The place buzzed with low conversations and the hum of old vents. But on his screen, everything was razor-sharp and orderly. The truth was delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon's blade. These are your login logs, Tessa, he said, pointing to a highlighted list of timestamps and IP addresses. Except here, here, and here. Those aren't yours? My chest tightened. Where are they from? The access came from another device on a home network in Portland. He paused, letting the implication land. The same network where your parents live. Something in me curled inward, like my ribs were trying to shield my heart from an impact. He wasn't accusing my parents, not directly, but there was only one person in that house who had memorized my old passwords, who knew my security questions, who resented my success. Ariana. Noah scrolled again, his finger running down the screen. There's more. The payments missing from your scholarship refund. Someone rotted them twice. He opened another window, showing a list of transactions tagged under my campus account. And these tutoring accusations and plagiarism complaints. They were sent using a mirrored email. One character off from your official university address. That's intentional. My throat went dry. intentional. The word felt surgical, proof of her malice, not just simple access. It meant she hadn't just used my account, she had actively impersonated me to commit fraud and sabotage. I left the workspace shaking, my phone buzzing in my pocket. Sarah texted, "Are you okay? You've been quiet." I couldn't respond. I needed airspace. Something steady to hold on to. The text felt suffocating. Instead, I drove straight toward my parents' house, not stopping, but pulling into the driveway and sitting there for 20 minutes, staring at the porch light flickering under the early summer sky. My dad found me there. "Tessa, what's going on?" I didn't tell him everything. I couldn't break him yet. Just enough. That scholarship money that went missing. The plagiarism complaint. Someone's been in my accounts, Dad. Messing with my life. He swallowed hard. "Are you saying?" "I don't know what I'm saying." I lied. Not until I had the legal framework to back it up. Because the truth, the whole truth, would shatter his complicated denial. He still believed Ariana was wounded, not dangerous. Back on campus that night, I pulled every file, every screenshot, every odd detail Noah had confirmed. If Ariana wanted to tear down the life I built, I would protect it with everything I had left. The quiet kid was done shrinking. I was ready to prepare the final, devastating move. The discovery of Noah Vance's evidence, the login locations, the mirrored emails, the undeniable footprint of my sister's malice, was a cold shock that immediately catalyzed action. The quiet dread that had plagued me for months transformed into a directed, focused rage. I was no longer fighting for my innocence. I was fighting to protect the life I had built from a deliberate, calculated campaign of destruction. The time for hoping she would stop was over. The next morning, I contacted Mira Reyes, the civil litigation attorney recommended by a former professor. Mira was sharp, controlled, and utterly pragmatic. Her office was minimalist, the opposite of the chaotic, emotional spaces I'd been inhabiting. I placed the massive stack of evidence. The financial reports, the copied email logs from Noah, the timelines of academic complaints, on her clean, glass desk. Mira didn't need a lengthy preamble. She reviewed the contents quickly, her eyes scanning the data points that confirmed the premeditation of the attacks. She saw that this wasn't just a fit of jealousy, this was criminal sabotage designed to permanently damage my career, before it even began. When she finally looked up, she asked only one question, her voice crisp. "When do you want this to stop?" The question wasn't about the date of graduation. It was about my moral line. I didn't want revenge. I wanted severance. "When it's no longer just me she can hurt," I said. "When she faces the real, permanent consequence of what she has done, not just a dramatic scene." That was the moment the shift happened. Quiet, but absolute. I wasn't the victim reacting to her assaults anymore. I was the strategist, preparing the final move in a game she didn't know she had already lost. Mira helped me refine the material. We drafted a concise, legally airtight statement summarizing the findings and detailing the proof of financial fraud and academic interference. Graduation was just 2 weeks away, and the weight of that looming date changed the atmosphere of the campus. Everyone was celebratory, focused on packing, on saying goodbye. I, meanwhile, was preparing for war. I printed the statement and the confirmed logs again. I found a thick, manila envelope and labeled it clearly a 19. Inside, I tucked every piece of evidence. For the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. They had the cold, clean steadiness of someone finally stepping out of survival mode and into agency. The fear was gone, replaced by a singular purpose. I began living in 2 timelines at once. In one, I was a normal graduating student. I returned my dorm key, finished my final thesis summary, and tried on my cap and gown in front of the mirror, noting how the dark fabric contrasted with the pale determination in my own reflection. In the other timeline, I was preparing for the final, public confrontation. I had to assume Ariana would strike on graduation day. It was the only stage large enough to satisfy her desperate need for public spectacle. And the only day she thought I would be entirely defenseless. The night before the ceremony, I barely slept. The sky outside my studio was a deep, cloudless blue, the kind that made the world feel paused and significant. I laid out everything: the sealed envelope of evidence, the printed logs Noah had verified, the statement Mira had helped me prepare, and my capstone summary. Everything was ready to deploy. At sunrise, I dressed carefully. I slipped the thick, sealed envelope labeled A19 into the inner lining of my academic gown, tucking it deep into the fold of the heavy fabric. The weight of the envelope was a strange comfort, the tangible proof that I held the truth, not her chaos. I was armed not with words, but with documentation. I walked out the door and toward the largest, most significant day of my life, ready to face the sister who had tried to steal it from me. I had secured the truth. Now all I needed was the right moment to release it. The weight of the hidden envelope, A19, was a constant, solid presence against my skin as I approached the university auditorium in Portland. It was already buzzing with activity. Students hugged each other. A collective sigh of relief and excitement. Parents fanned themselves with programs, beaming with pride. Everything looked festive and hopeful. And underneath it all, a slow, determined pulse tapped in my chest. It wasn't fear of Ariana anymore. It was the fear of what she would force me to reveal. The fear of the truth breaking our family. When my family arrived, I saw it instantly. Ariana was not dressed like someone attending a graduation. She was dressed like someone hosting the event, wearing a crisp, theatrical white blazer, dramatic makeup, and a posture that was too rehearsed. She scanned the room, eyes darting, hungry for the attention she hadn't yet earned. My mother waved first, too brightly, her smile strained. My father hugged me tight, lingering in a way that told me he sensed the volatile situation, the unspoken tension that had permeated the house for months. Ariana stood behind them, arms folded, an almost invisible tremor of anticipation in her jawline. "Congrats, Tessa," she said smoothly, her voice lacking any warmth. "Big day." "Yeah," I replied, keeping my own voice even and neutral. "Huge." Her smile flickered, sharp, predatory. For a brief second, I saw the plan in her eyes, the malicious, almost ecstatic certainty of her next move. She didn't come to celebrate. She came to strike. To tear down the validation I was about to receive. I took my assigned seat on the stage with the honors students. From up there, looking out over the crowded auditorium, the audience looked like a single, breathing organism. The lights warmed my face, and a strange, profound calm settled in my bones. I was prepared. Dean Matthews, who knew the entire history of the sabotage, met my eye from his seat near the podium. He gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was confirmation the strategy was sound, the contingency in place. The ceremony began. Speeches were given. Applause swelled and dipped. My name was alphabetically toward the end, which meant Ariana had a wide, open stage of time to decide precisely when she would ruin the day. The minutes dragged, each one increasing the internal pressure until the air felt brittle. Then came the moment. I was halfway to the podium when I heard the scrape first, the chair snapping backward, just as I remembered it from the initial shock. Then her voice, tearing through the formality. She cheated her way through college? The sound was immediate and absolute, silencing the auditorium instantly. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Faculty froze. Phones lifted instantly, bright rectangles capturing the spectacle she wanted so desperately to be the star of. "She doesn't deserve that diploma." Ariana shouted again, louder this time, her voice carrying a manic conviction as she pointed directly at me. "She lied. She manipulated the system," Ask anyone? Dozens of faces rotated toward me, their expressions shifting from festive joy to shock, and then to something more complicated: concern, confusion, curiosity. A sea of eyes, all asking me, "Is it true?" I stood up. Every step down the short aisle felt deliberate, measured, the click of my heels on the wood floor acting as a final, precise countdown. I didn't look at Ariana, not because I feared what she would say next, but because I already knew everything she was about to lose. Students shifted to let me through. Some whispered, some stared openly, and a few looked away entirely, as if humiliation might be contagious. But humiliation wasn't what lived in me anymore. It was purpose. The dean waited at the podium with that steady expression, his hands resting lightly on the stack of diplomas. When I reached him, the room was still pulsing with Ariana's accusations, but his voice, when he spoke, was calm, official, and utterly unimpressed by the drama. "Tessa Hart," he said. I accepted my diploma, the parchment solid and cold in my grasp, and lifted my chin. I leaned in just an inch, making sure my voice was only for him, for the microphone, and for the record. "It's under my seat," I whispered. Envelope marked A19. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply smiled, small and knowing, and nodded. The nod was the quiet beginning of the end. I had refused to fight her battle, and instead, I had launched my own, silent, strategic war. I had turned her public spectacle into the evidence that would ultimately destroy her. The dean's knowing nod, that quiet confirmation that the evidence had been passed, was the signal that ended the stage of public humiliation and began the stage of legal reckoning. As I walked off the stage, my diploma held firmly, the energy of the auditorium shifted abruptly. Behind us, security moved with practiced, quiet efficiency. A faculty member approached the row where Ariana still stood, chest heaving with the effort of her performance. Her dramatic makeup cracking under the heat of the stage lights and her own adrenaline. She didn't realize the room was no longer hers. Not after the dean's nod. Not after the evidence was already moving from under my chair to the legal offices. As I took my final steps down the aisle, the whispers changed. They were no longer directed at me, questioning my integrity, but at Ariana, questioning her stability. A woman in the second row lowered her phone, frowning. Not at the graduating student, but at the screaming sister. Professor Hale, watching from the faculty section, shook his head slowly. A reporter for the local paper leaned forward, scribbling furiously, his focus now entirely on the volatile performance unfolding in the crowd. Ariana sensed the change too. Her voice, which had been loud and self-assured, wobbled with disbelief.
"What?"
she barked, looking around at the rapidly cooling audience.
"You all saw it!"
She didn't deny anything. She just stood there. She didn't understand that silence, sometimes, is not an admission of guilt. Sometimes, silence is the perfect, cold shell of strategy. Security reached her row. One of them spoke softly, offering her a choice: settle down or step out. But Ariana didn't do soft. She had counted on this dramatic confrontation to destroy me, and the fact that it was failing, that I had achieved my goal with quiet dignity, caused her polished exterior to shatter completely. "You're all blind!" she screamed, pointing again at me. Desperation breaking through her practiced composure. She's been lying for years. But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. They had seen me walk calm and steady. They had seen the dean nod. They had seen the stark contrast between the composed student and the hysterical accuser. They had watched Ariana unravel, and unravel she did. Her voice cracked first, then her hands flew up in frantic, meaningless gestures, and finally, the control she had always believed she had over me, over our family, over the narrative, disappeared entirely. She tried to keep shouting, incoherent accusations spilling from her mouth, but the security officers gently, firmly, guided her toward the aisle. It wasn't forceful, It wasn't harsh. It was simply the inevitable, natural conclusion of her own destructive choices. When she reached the doors at the back of the auditorium, she turned one last time, her eyes hot with disbelief and raw, wounded fury. "You think this is over, Tessa?" She spat, her final public line. "You think that little whisper makes you innocent?" I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew the public spectacle was over, and the truth was already moving quietly, legally, irrevocably. I felt a tremendous, exhausting sense of clarity. After the ceremony concluded, I met Dean Matthews backstage. He held the envelope I'd hidden, A19, the weight of the evidence heavy in his hands. "This is serious, Tessa," he said gently, acknowledging the scale of the familial betrayal. "So was what she did," I replied, my voice steady. He nodded, his face steady. "You did the right thing." Mira Reyes, the attorney, arrived minutes later, her presence as crisp and controlled as ever. She reviewed the contents quickly, the log statements from Noah, the transaction evidence showing the rerouted payments, the summary of fabricated emails. Every piece pointed in one direction. "She won't be able to spin this," Mira said. "Not in front of the academic board, not in civil court, not anywhere." And just like that, the final stage of Ariana's plan collapsed. Not because I shouted, not because I fought her on the floor of the auditorium, but because I refused to fight on her terms. My quiet strategy had successfully deployed the truth, and the results, I knew, would be absolute. The closing of the auditorium doors was the sound of the public spectacle ending. But the truth, once released, moved faster than I ever anticipated. In the days that followed, the investigation, launched by the university's academic board, moved with a startling, methodical speed, driven by the clean, undeniable proof I had provided. By the end of the week, Ariana was officially banned from campus pending review. The evidence was simply too comprehensive to ignore or deflect. 2 professors came forward with suspicious emails and requests they had dismissed earlier as clerical errors, but now understood in the context of my sister's actions. The scholarship office traced the rerouted payments directly to accounts tied to her device and her personal email. When Noah Vance submitted his detailed digital report, the board didn't need more than a single, brief meeting. Ariana's campaign of sabotage was undeniable. Her outburst at graduation, the very spectacle she thought would be my final undoing, became the clearest evidence of her motive, her obsession, and her malicious intent. The public performance, fueled by resentment and ego, had backfired, sealing her fate. And in the quiet after the storm, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel victorious, not in the triumphant, loud way Ariana always craved. I felt free. The crushing weight of her constant judgment, the paranoia of the subtle attacks, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove my worth. It all lifted. In the weeks that followed, the investigation continued its work, and the academic board issued its final, scathing findings. Ariana had accessed my accounts, redirected my scholarship payments, fabricated emails, and attempted to interfere with my academic standing. She was officially banned from campus grounds and immediately referred for civil action. When Mira Reyes filed the restitution claim for the missing funds and the emotional damages, the evidence was so clean and documented that the negotiations barely lasted an hour. There was no argument, only compliance. My parents didn't take it well. There was shock, followed by a painful period of denial, then quiet, heavy acceptance when the court paperwork left absolutely no room for imagination. My father called me one evening, his voice heavy with disappointment and deep sadness. "I should have seen it, Tessa," he whispered. I let myself believe she was just struggling. I didn't blame him. Ariana had always known how to hide in the soft, blurred spaces where parental love melts into blind assumption. She had always known how to manipulate the narrative of the golden child who was secretly wounded. Soon after, I moved to a small apartment in Corvallis, about 70 miles south of Portland. It was nothing fancy, but sunlight poured through the windows every morning, and the air was calm. I bought a second-hand dining table, adopted a black and white cat, who immediately took ownership of every chair, and I let my life become simple again. For the first time in years, my days weren't shaped by fear or by second, guessing every interaction. I studied for my licensing exams. I walked the quiet streets. I breathed, and little by little, the space Ariana, once filled with chaos and competition, became something gentler. It became room to rebuild myself, on my own terms, dictated only by my own ambition and my own effort. If there is one thing I learned from that long, agonizing walk to the podium, it is that telling the truth isn't about winning an argument. It's about finally stepping out of the shadows someone else built for you. Ariana's choices shaped my pain, but they absolutely do not shape my future. I built that myself, piece by piece, with documented proof, unwavering patience, and a final, absolute refusal to shrink any longer. If you have ever had to stand up to someone who should have protected you, who should have been your ally, you are not alone. You have the right to claim your own space, your own truth, and your own quiet victory. That, I finally understood, was the highest possible honor.